Make sure this is to make sure I don't strain my vocal cords. Does it sound good, Usha?
It sounds okay.
Oh, okay. Welcome. I'm not sure if everyone was here last time. What we did last time was assimilation and elision. We'll practice a little bit with that today, with assimilation, and we'll look at the narrow transcription, you know, the text where you have to include as many connected speech forms as possible. And we'll start to look at intonation as well. So what I'll do again is I'll keep it down to the basics and what you need to know to pass the test. I'm not including extra bits and pieces. Yeah? So all I'm saying here is things that you need to know to pass the test, but I'm not going to talk about all kind of extra details, even though I would like to. Okay, so last week I said how to pass this course. I gave you a few tips. Here are they again. What you should do to pass the course so far, what we did last week, to pass the part on assimilation and elision, that is. Learn the consonant labels by heart. As I said, there's a Quizlet on natschool. So make sure you know the consonant labels by heart. If you don't know them, the part on assimilation is going to be very difficult, because then you don't know really what happens. What you should also do is learn the assimilation and elision patterns by heart and practice them. I think pages 125 and 126 in the book. If you study that, it gives you the kind of assimilation patterns that occur in English, right? So an N before a P will always change into an M, for example, those kinds of patterns. If you learn those by heart, it'll become much, much easier to recognize assimilation in the text. And finally, study the reader on assimilation by Dutch speakers. There's a part on assimilation mistakes that Dutch people make in the test. For that part, you study the reader, which is on natschool, called Additional Notes on Assimilation or something like that. Yeah? So far, so good. This is what you do to pass the test so far. Right. Then, the narrow transcription. Can you see what's on the board, on the screen? Because of the light. Maybe, let's see if I can close the curtain. Which? No. Oh, you can't. Okay. We'll just try it like this then. The narrow transcription. Now, what are you looking for in the narrow transcription? There's quite a few points. I think you can score 10 points, which is quite a few. So make sure you know how to do this. I know I didn't teach phonetics this year, but what I heard from my colleagues, many people failed the test because they lost like 8 or 9 points in this part. Yeah, you can score a lot of points in this part. Okay, what are you looking for here? Things like assimilation, elision, linking R, intrusive R, weak forms, and contracted forms. Now, why do we include this in the test? It's because what we're aiming for, one of our aims in Phonetics II is for you to understand connected speech. What happens when you link words together? How do you sound natural? Yeah. Of course, when you speak, you don't just pronounce individual words. You put them together in a sentence, and then things happen in your mouth when you speak. If that doesn't happen, then you sound really unnatural. So, what we want you to learn is to sound natural, how to link words together. And one of the things that happens then is assimilation, of course, and elision, etc. Now, that's why we put this in a test. What's the easiest way to pass it? I thought about this. sure if it's safe if I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Find the weak forms first. Why? Because for many of you, finding weak forms will be easier to find in simulation. And so what I'm doing now is I'm teaching to the test. I'm not teaching you skills. Well, I'm teaching you a skill, how to pass a test, but I'm not teaching you phonetics in the sense that I want you to leave this room and be better phoneticians. I'm teaching you to the test. If I were you, I would look for weak forms first. If you find those, then you might already find 10 or 11 items. You should try and aim for 20 items in this. There might be more, but we want you to aim for 20 items. Yeah? If you get all the weak forms, that should give you at least 5 points already. Weak forms and contracted forms. Yeah, so contracted forms are things like won't and can't. And weak forms, of course, are things like of course. And then there's usually some linking are, not so much intrusive are, but most of it will be weak forms and contracted forms. When you've found those, then try and look for assimilation, because there's bound to be quite a bit of assimilation in the text. Yeah? So, what I'd like you to do is look at this transcription. This is not a transcription. Look at this text and find as many of those forms, assimilation, elision, etc., as you can find. Yeah? It's fine if you work together, and I'll show you the answers later on. Say about 10 minutes or so. Yeah, go ahead. Press the button recording.
Thank you, sorry.
Okay. So people ask me, what's the difference between linking R and intrusive R? Let's have a look at an example of a linking R. Yeah. Third line from the bottom. They now feel there is. Now, in isolation, when the word is on its own, we'd say there. Right? That's British English, not an American English, of course. British English would say there. We don't pronounce the R. It's there in the spelling, right? There's an R in the spelling, but we don't pronounce it. Now, it's followed by a vowel. And to make the pronunciation easier, we do pronounce the R. And there is not so easy to pronounce because you need to put a glottal stop in between. There is, yeah? So you put your vocal cords together in between. To avoid that, to make the pronunciation more smooth and smoother, we add an R in between. We say there is. There is. And that's the R that's there in the spelling. This is called linking R. When we link two words together with an R, that's already present in the spelling. Yeah? Now if you look at the word idea, third line, third sentence from the top, they've got no idea at all. Sometimes, even though this is frowned upon by some people, seen as incorrect, but it's done by many native speakers, we say not idea at all, but idea-rattle. Idea-rattle. This is called intrusive R. The R is not there in the spelling. We don't say idea. Yeah? We don't say it. And it's not there in the spelling. However, to make pronunciation easier, we say idea-rattle. We add an R. This is an R which is not in the spelling, which we do pronounce in fluent speech, even though you don't necessarily imitate it, because some people frown upon it if you don't do it naturally. Don't do it. But this does happen a lot, and that's what we call intrusive R. So the difference between linking R is seen in the spelling, obtrusive R is not seen in the spelling. Yeah? Right, I'll show you the answers. As you can see, I made all the weak forms bold here. Have, that, second line, of, third line, have, and at, and to, fourth line, to, fifth line, to, sixth line, to, and can, and they are. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Already 12 examples of contracted forms of weak forms. Now you've got to realise, when I put this together, I didn't think about it very carefully. So on the test, we might actually try and avoid so many weak forms. Still, the most common kind of feature you'll be looking for in connected speech. So if not 12, then maybe 8 or 6. Yeah. But you can gain a lot of points by just trying to find weak forms or contracted forms. It doesn't matter whether they are contracted or weak forms. You don't need to write that down. All you need to do is to indicate it. Now, how do you indicate that on the test? As I put on the wrote on the board here, I'll do it again. So say the transcription says we have. Would you write down, say it's we've, yeah? Then there's a line underneath. You don't transcribe the entire thing. So say now, sorry. Now we have. You don't transcribe the entire thing, the line, just transcribe the changes. So then you transcribe we or we've. So you just indicate the changes. Yeah? Okay. So, which features are we looking for here? What I do when I do this is I just try and pronounce this in very slow speech. But that's because most of these features will occur in my pronunciation. That's because I've got a British pronunciation. For many of you, this might not be the case. So that's why I told you, try and look for the weak forms first. However, what I do is I just read it very carefully, very slowly. On many occasions, right? That's the first one. On many occasions. On many. Assimilation. The N in Nicholas becomes an M in mama. On many occasions I have becomes I've, or I've, so a contracted form, I've experienced that. The D in experienced is elided because it's between two vowels. Experience that. Experience that. The A becomes a schwa. Experience that. Experience that people, the T is assimilated to a P. Yeah. Experience that people who win great amounts of money win great. The N is assimilated to a Vila sound. Win great. Win great amounts of money. Also the V sound at the end here is elided. Could be elided. Great amounts of money. Only happens in rapid speech, of course. greater amounts of money don't become. Two things happen here at the same time. Don't, the t is elided, the n is assimilated to an m because of the following b. Yeah? So the t is elided first, then you say don't become, and that changes to don't become. Any happier? Instead, when they. Is this correct assimilation or not? I'm just wondering whether it's correct. When they receive their fortune. When they. I'm not sure whether the sound here is assimilated actually. We'll skip it for the moment. When they receive their fortune, they've got. Yeah? They've got no idea at all. That's the one we talked about. No idea at all. At becomes at, weak form. What to do? T. What to do with it? While a dental phoneme here, dental fricative, is changed into lateral. While they used to drink. Assimilation. Used to, this is a rare case of energy assimilation in English. Remember, energy assimilation hardly ever occurs in English. This is a rare example of where it does. Used becomes used to. Used to. So the z becomes a s. Used to. Now, these kinds of examples are maybe difficult to find, and that's why you try and find as many easy examples as possible. Now, weak forms are easy. You can score points with those. Once you've done that, then you can start to look for the more difficult ones. So if you miss out on used, you might find 10 other examples, which will still give you all the points. Used to, the D in used is elided because it's between two consonants, s and t. T, two becomes t. Weak form. Dream of their own mansion. Of becomes So this is weak form, so I should have made the O red as well, because that changes into a schwa. Yeah, it's a weak form. And the V, the F, the V sound of is elided. Dream of their own mansion. Own, the N becomes a N. That's assimilation. Own mansion. Own mansion. We don't say own mansion, we say own mansion. Or other, oh, there's another example which I forgot. Or other, so the R in or is a linking R. Or rather, light matters. The T is assimilated to a P, light matters, because of the following bilabial end. They now feel there is, the dental fricative is elided, is assimilated to lateral. Feel there is, lacking assimilation of place and manner, is no genuine purpose. Another one which I forgot, the N in genuine is assimilated to an M, genuine purpose. Yeah? Genuine purpose to their lives, or purpose to their lives. Purpose to their lives. Yeah? Not necessarily weak, but could be weak here. T. Two becomes T. Hence, they tend to become depressed. Tend to. The D is elided here because it's between two consonants. Tend to. Two becomes T. Tend to. Weak form. Become depressed. Depressed. Tend. Depressum. Here, this is complicated. Right, many things can happen here at the same time. First of all, in and, we can make it weak in various ways. We can say and, or we could leave out the D, which will be left out here. I'll explain later why. In many cases, you're left with just an M, Nicholas. depressed many times. Yeah? Depressed many times. In many cases, we'll just pronounce it N instead of and. You and me, right? Cats and dogs. Now, if you have just an N here, the D in depressed, is between two consonants, between an S and between a N. Depressed N. Yeah. In this case, it's elided. Depressed N. Depressing. Depressing many times. Yeah? The next thing that could happen here, now I realize this one's complicated, so if you don't get all this, don't worry, at least you can get all the others. But here you can score quite a few points with only one word. So the D is elided, we're left with depressed many times. Now because the N in and, which is brought down to just an N, because that's followed by an M, bilabial M, the N also changes to a bilabial. Now that's complicated. So what we say is depress many times. Depress many times. Depress many times. So maybe you put a schwa in between as well. Depress many times. No, not necessarily. Depress many times. So if you speak really fast, you say hence they tend to become depressed many times. Depressed many times. Depressed many times. Yeah? So you hardly pronounce it and, it turns into an M. If you find this too complicated, don't worry. There's other less complicated things in this text. You can see can changes to can, and then they are severely unhappy becomes their contracted form. They're severely unhappy. Now, these are more than 20. Yeah? So, again, look for the weak forms first, and then try and find the rest. If you learned all the assimilation patterns by heart, and elision, and you know where elision occurs, then you should be able to find those as well. How are we for time? Okay, how to pass this course so far? I said learn the consonant labels by heart, learn the assimilation elision patterns by heart, study the reader and assimilation by Dutch speakers, and next, study the list of weak forms and sounding better. Yeah? If you want to be able to spot weak forms, maybe you do them in your speech. For many of you I know you don't, or you don't recognize them. Learn the list by heart. If you look in sounding better, if you don't have it anymore, try and get a copy from the mediatheek. There's a list of weak forms. List the weak forms. Of in list of is weak as well. List of weak forms in sounding better. So just learn those by heart. Asha.
Do you remember which page?
No. I'm not the kind of teacher that knows all the page numbers by heart.
Okay.
Right. So if you do this, then you should be able to pass the test so far. Until this part. Right, I think it's time for a break. We'll have a short break, say 10 minutes. 10 minutes. And then we'll continue. Right. So what I was going to do is an exercise with you to find out what kind of assimilation or elision occurs. Now, for the sake of time, I'll just discuss this with you. Just as repetition. So in these cases, assimilation and assimilation. Now that's interesting. It says what kind of assimilation. It's a different kind of assimilation. So what kind of assimilation or elision happens in these, occurs in these words or phrases? Here are the answers. On many becomes on many. The alveolar N changes into a bilateral M due to following bilateral N, which is leading assimilation of place. Now, I'm not going to go through this in detail. This PowerPoint will be on natschool. You can read the answers for yourself in your own time. So you can do this at home as an extra exercise. What kind of assimilation occurs here? As you can see, most of it is leading assimilation of place. As I said last week, remember, most of the assimilation that occurs in English is assimilation, leading assimilation of plates and final alveolus. Most of the time, if you have an alveolar sound, the end of a word, assimilation is likely to occur. Yeah? Somehow your brain thinks that alveolar sounds are hard to pronounce. So it changes them into something else. Leading assimilation in place. The inexperienced people, the D is elided because it's between two consonants. The same goes for don't become. The T is elided between two consonants. The only other different kind of assimilation is fill areas. Dental fricative becomes alveolar lateral. This is lagging assimilation of place and manner. Yeah? Look this up again in your own time. Intonation. 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 My favorite subject. Right. So, especially for this, I'm going to go through the basics. So I'll skip all the fun part, which I love to teach. I'm just going to go through the basics that you need to know the past tense. Yeah? So please note, again, this is teaching to the test. This is not teaching phonetics as I think I should. Right. Now, when we're speaking, when we're having a conversation, I think there's two basic elements. Or the two elements that occur most frequently. We either make a statement or we ask a question. Right? I say something or I ask you a question. If I ask you a question, Kun, you're going to give me an answer. Yeah? If you ask me a question, I'm going to give you an answer. I either say, Kun, write this down, or Kun, do you know the answer to this question? Yeah? So I either make statements or I ask questions. Now, of course, there's commands as well, and that sort of thing. But I think when it comes down to the basics, we're left with questions and answers. Statements are made with a falling intonation at the end. Can you hear that? I'm making a statement now, because I'm lecturing. I'm making statements almost all the time, unless I ask you questions, but most of the time I'll be speaking in a monologue, so I'll be making statements. So in my speech now, you can hear I'm using falling intonation all the time. Yeah? So I'm speaking like this, and then at the end of a sentence, my intonation falls. And then I start another sentence, and at the end of the sentence, my intonation falls again. Yeah? Statements have falling intonation. Questions, however, have falling, a rising intonation. Questions of rising intonation? Am I asking a question now? So my voice goes up. Right? Another question? Okay. Falling and rising. If you understand, statements fall and questions rise. That sounds like a song. If you understand that statements fall and questions rise. Or a poem or something. But if you understand that, then you'll do quite well. Yeah? So bear this in mind. This is the basic thing you need to remember. Falling and rising. So let's talk about these two basic patterns then. Falling and rising. We use the falling intonation for statements, as I said, and a rising intonation for questions. Note the assimilation of place in statements. Do you hear it? Assimilation in statements. The T in statements becomes a P. Statements. Yeah?
Sorry, kunt u dat nog een keer zeggen?
Assimilation of place in statements. I'm going back now. I'm talking about assimilation. So in the word statement, there's assimilation. The T in statement becomes a P.
Statement.
Statement.
Statement. Op die manier. Statement.
Yeah? But we're not talking about assimilation now, we're talking about intonation. So falling for statements, rising for questions. I'm making a statement. I'm asking a question. Do you hear the difference? Up and down. Consequently, now this is important. This will show you why you need to understand the basic thing that statements fall and questions rise. If I make a statement and I'm sure of myself, usually, right? Usually if I say something, I'm sure of what I say. I'm not talking about people who are uncertain in general, but in general you can say, if you make a statement and you're certain, that's why a falling intonation makes you sound certain of yourself. That's why, if I taught you this lesson in a normal, ordinary Phonetics II course, I'd show you a video clip of Barack Obama and John McCain when Barack Obama first won the elections. Obama's speeches always sounded really authoritative. Why? Because he spoke like a preacher. And everything he said with a falling intonation. And that's why he was going to win the elections. Because everyone thought he was really sure of what he said. I could be a preacher. Nice. So if you use a falling intonation, you sound certain of what you say. Yeah? I'm going to give you the feeling I know everything about phonetics. Because I stand here in front of you, I know everything there is to say, and I use a falling intonation in every sentence. And that's why you are going to pass this course. Because you are here, and we are making the most of it.
U bent net te laat voor verkiezingen.
Sorry?
U bent net te laat voor verkiezingen.
Yeah. I could have participated in the elections. However, if I'm lecturing here, and I'm using a rising intonation all the time, like it sounds like I'm not really sure what I'm saying, right?
Mm.
Yeah, then you don't really have the feeling that you're going to pass this course, because everything I say sounds so unsure and uncertain. Yeah, it's like I'm questioning myself all the time. Am I asking questions? Or am I making statements? You don't really know. Yeah? You hear the difference? You hear the difference? You hear the difference. So falling intonation makes you sound certain of yourself. But rising intonation makes you sound uncertain. Certain English accents have rising intonation all the time.
Georgie.
I think Geordie has some of it, yeah. Has some of it? Yeah. I think Liverpool as well. I'm not quite sure. I'm not so good at localizing accents. But some English accents have a rising intonation all the time. So, John McCain, he worked together with Sarah Palin. You might remember her. She had a rising intonation all the time, and people thought she was really stupid. Yeah, because she sounded uncertain. So even when she made a clever statement, people thought she was saying something stupid and made fun of her, right? Because she used rising intonation all the time. That was her accent. So, to conclude, falling intonations make you sound certain, rising intonations make you sound uncertain. Because you sound like you're asking questions all the time. So you can make a statement sound like a question, and then it sounds not so certain. Similarly, I can say, open your book, write this down, vote for me. I could also say, open your book, write this down please, vote for me please. That's a request, right? Again, because it sounds more like a question. So a command has a falling intonation, unless I want it to sound polite, more like a request, and then I use a rising intonation. Yeah? So remember, falls always sound more authoritative, more impolite, more certain, etc. Rising is always more polite, more friendly, etc. Oh, that's what I just said. So, if you want to sound impolite, use a falling intonation. If you want to sound polite, use a rising intonation. That's why Dutch and German people are very often seen as rude by British people. Why? For two reasons. And that's something I wasn't going to talk about today. I'm not going to talk about that in detail. We make a distinction between high rises, high falls, high, or low falls, low. Yeah, both fall down, but some from a high position and others from a low position. Now, high falls and high rises, higher intonation, is something typically British and it sounds polite. Low intonation and low falls and low rises sound less polite. And that's exactly the difference between Dutch and English. So if you have a Dutch accent, or if you're Dutch, pay attention to that. When I first went to the UK, I was 14. I said, when I left, I said, bye. Okay, bye. People thought I was so impolite. Would you like a coffee? Yes, please. No, thank you. Which to British ears sounds like, shut up, I've got enough of you, right? I don't want to speak to you. So if you use low intonation, also Dutch intonation is more monotonous, then you sound impolite. I had to learn to say, someone said to me, you shouldn't say bye. That's what you say in Dutch, right? Hoi, doei. It's fine, right? No, you don't. Yeah, alsjeblieft. To British ears, that sounds so uninteresting. So I had to learn to rise my intonation and say, bye.
Klinkt echt super gay als je dat de hele tijd moet doen.
Yeah. So when I first did that, I felt really strange. Yeah. Also because in Dutch, that's considered effeminate, female, if you use a higher intonation. Yeah. So if I speak really with a British accent, then Dutch people think I'm maybe a bit effeminate. My wife, she starts screaming when she hears me speak English. Consequently, secondly, in Dutch we don't use as many rises as in English. What I mean by that is rises in between. What I mean by that is rises in between. So English intonation is higher and also has more rises. Dutch intonation is much more monotonous. We don't vary so much. We say by, yeah, very straightforward. By, because we Dutch are straightforward, right? We don't talk around it, we'll just say it. British people talk around it all the time, so they don't really say what they think. Yeah. And they move in circles. So that's why Dutch people sometimes are considered impolite on the basis of their intonation. So be aware of that. If you're Dutch, or if you have a native language which has the same intonation pattern. Be aware, if you go to the UK, I'm not so sure about the US because I never go there. Not because I don't like it, but just because I've never been.
Sure.
America first.
Sure.
But be aware that your intonation makes a difference. Yeah? So if you go to the airport in Schiphol, notice the people at the desk who take in your passport. I've forgotten what they're called. If they're Dutch, I've seen this quite often. They can sound really rude. Like I saw them interviewing, asking questions to a Pakistani man, and they didn't intend to be polite, to be impolite. They just intended to be professional. Especially if you're professional, if you want to be professional in Dutch, you just you don't use so much intonation, right? That's just the way you speak. So let's say, where are you from? What are you doing here? Why are you visiting? Why are you staying for 2 weeks? If you translate that to Dutch, that would sound like, waarom ben je hier? Maybe, okay, why are you here? Waarom ben je hier? So the intonation in Dutch sounds not so strange as when they do it in English. So they spoke English with a Dutch intonation. I could see this Pakistani man was getting really nervous because he thought they were angry with him or something. Or suspicious. They thought he was suspicious. So if you're ever going to work on the airport, be aware that your intonation changes people's feelings, influences the way people feel. Also, when I'm using a falling intonation, it sounds like I've come to the end of something. I've said what I wanted to say. That's finished. Because if you make a statement, then that's it, right? You're not expecting more. Full stop. Unfinished intonation belongs to questions. If you ask a question, then you're expecting more. You're expecting an answer. Yeah? It's like you're saying more is to come. What is the answer to my question? That's why if you use a rising intonation at the end of a sentence, your sentence isn't finished. Your sentence isn't finished. Right? I was doing it just now. When you use a rising intonation, you sound like more is coming. This is difficult when you're giving a speech, for example, because you might accidentally use rising intonation. Oh, and then you realise that was the last thing you wanted to say. So you have to add something else to make it sound like you're done. Like I was in church once, and we had a preacher, and he was praying, and he was using rising intonations all the time. It was so annoying to listen to, because he'd say things like, "We pray for the sick," and then you realise that was the last thing he wanted to say. So he'd say, "We pray for the sick. We pray for those who are in trouble. We pray for those who are in trouble." Right? Right. If you
a rising intonation, you're not finished. You're not finished. Yeah. So falling intonations make you sound finished. Rising intonations make you sound unfinished, or final and non-final. That's why very often when there's a comma in a sentence, in the middle of a sentence, like I'm doing now, lots of commas, pauses, I use rising intonations because I haven't come to the end of my sentence. Yeah? So in between a sentence you'll have rising intonations all the time. And then at the end it falls. Questions? Questions? Maybe you don't dare to answer my question because I use a false intonation. Questions? Sounds like really polite. Also something to remember when you teach, never say questions. Say questions?
No.
Finally, rising intonation is used for things which are unfinished, which also occurs in the middle of a sentence when we're giving parenthetic information. And I put it between brackets here because that's what it is. Parentheses is a posh term for brackets. Parenthetic information, which means by the way information. Yeah? Or relative clauses. The students who did their best passed the exam. Yeah? Who did their best, rising intonation, passed the exam. Falling intonation. Yeah? So parenthetic information, we use rising intonation. Now, remember, I'm not talking about all the technical details regarding intonation. I'm not talking about nucleuses and coders and what have you. But you've got to realize that all of these patterns occur on the nucleus, right? So that's the most important part, syllable, in the utterance, in the part you're pronouncing. So it will always be one syllable which has the intonation pattern. Right? When I make a statement, there's always one syllable which falls. I'm saying that because in test you'll be asked something like, do the following nucleuses rise or fall? And the nucleus will be underlined. So if I'm making a command, open your book, then book is a nucleus and that falls. Yeah? Do you have any questions? Questions? Yeah? That's the part that rises. Do you have any? It doesn't rise. The nucleus rises. That's the most important, the most prominent syllable. Okay. Are there any questions? No questions? Here's a test question. Then I have a question for you, if you have no questions for me. Do the following nucleuses, which are underlined, or nuclei, is an alternative plural form, fall or rise? Yeah? So do the underlined syllables fall or rise? Bearing in mind what I just said. A few minutes. Right. Falling or rising? I'll give you the answers. This is how you write it down on the test. Because in the test you also explain why they fall or rise. Back at work, all seem to be normal again. Work rises back at work because it's non-final, as I said, it's in the middle of a sentence
is unfinished, non-final. So you can either write down unfinished or non-final. Yeah? And the end of the sentence as a full because it's final and this is a statement. It's okay if you write down non-final and final and rise and fall, of course. Yeah? So something in the middle of a sentence generally rises because you're not finished yet, non-final. The end of a sentence it falls because it's final in a statement. Second one, shut the window. This has an exclamation mark, so we know this is not a request, this is not a polite command, this is a command. Shut the window. Window. This is a command, so this is falling intonation. Note the difference if I say shut the window, yeah? Then it becomes more polite request. I experienced this recently when I was on the ferry with my wife and my son, who's 17 months, and he was suffering from a really bad ear infection. Imagine being on the ferry to Hull in those tiny cabins with a baby who was suffering from ear infection. It was terrible. So I was sitting on the corridor trying to get my son to sleep, and then there were on the same corridor with us, our neighbours were drunken Englishmen. Now, drunken people are bad, but drunken Englishmen are worse. So anyway, apparently there's someone inside sleeping, and the other guy has forgotten his key. So he said, "Open door!" Open the door, yeah? I don't know where he's from. Open door! And I was trying to get my son to sleep, and he was shouting, "Open door! Open door! Bang, 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 bang! Open door!" It didn't work, of course, because it had a falling intonation.
Oh, that was
things you notice when you're a teacher, even though you've got a crying son, you're fed up, you're still doing phonetics in your head. Anyway, I thought this is not going to happen because this is falling intonation. The guy inside is sleeping and doesn't want to get up. So as long as it's impolite, he's not going to open the door. So in the end he said, and he changed, his intonation changed. It was really interesting. He said, so he first said, "Open door," and then he said, "Open door? Come on, open door! Open door!" So his intonation rised. Yeah? It became more polite. And then in the end it happened. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you about the third guy who also came after that, who was also drunk and wanted to touch us. Anyway, that was even worse. Third, who's knocking on the door? That's rising intonation because this is a question. My dad, who's a pessimist, rising intonation because this is bracketed parenthetic information. Yeah? A relative clause. Parenthetic information. This is extra, by the way, information. Finally, the man in the hat is George. This is an ordinary statement, and therefore we use falling intonations. Yeah? Fall because it's a statement. Any questions? How to pass this course so far? I said learn the consonant labels by heart, assimilation, elision patterns, study the reader and assimilation by Dutch speakers, study the list of weak forms. Then, when it comes to intonation, and then you're quite far. Yeah?
study pages 145 and 253 and practice falling and rising tones. Why? I haven't talked about rise falls and fall rises. There might be just one multiple choice question on rise falls and fall rises. Yeah? They are interesting and funny, but you can read that for yourself. If you're not so sure about what you read, then try and practice it with ya, for example, a yes. So say you have a rise fall, so rise fall, yeah, you rise first and you fall. If you practice it with yes, then you know what it sounds like. So rise fall, yes, yes, yeah, that's what I call the naughty intonation. Yes, yes. The other way around, fall rise, falls first and then rises. Yes, yes, yeah. Read about that in your book. Then I didn't talk about word stress because I think that's pretty straightforward. You just need to study that in the book. If you have any burning questions about that, I'll always be happy to answer them. Yeah? I didn't want to spend too much time on word stress because you just need to learn that by heart. Yeah?